Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're heading to sunny Andalusia. We're going to explore the museums of Cadiz, Spain. We're using Discovering Spain, Cadiz Museums and Travel Insights as our guide. Even just thinking about Cadiz, I can almost feel the sun and that sea breeze. This city has so much history. I'm really curious to see how all of that comes through in the museums.
Oh yeah, Cadiz is really a unique mix. It's a peninsula that juts right out into the Atlantic. That kind of location, it just attracts all kinds of people over the centuries, right?
Right.
You think Phoenicians, Romans, Moors, they all left their mark. And you can really see that in the museums.
Okay, so speaking of museums, the Museo de Cadiz sounds like the most obvious place to start. What were your first impressions of this one?
Well, it's pretty rare to find archaeology and fine art and puppets all in the same place.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, it's housed in a former convent. It's really intriguing.
A convent turned museum. That's a cool idea. But hold on, puppets, really?
It's not just some, whimsical thing, though I guess it is a bit charming. These puppets are called La Tia Norica de Cádiz, and they actually represent like a 200-year-old tradition.
Yeah.
And, get this, they have roots in Italian puppetry.
Wow.
They're actually officially recognized as works of art. They even received Spain's gold medal for merit in fine arts. So we're not talking about just kids' toys here.
No kidding. Okay, so that really puts it into perspective. It's interesting how something that seems simple can be so much more when you look closer, like little windows into history, right?
Hmm.
But let's go back a bit. You mentioned Phoenician sarcophagi. Those are a highlight. What makes those so special?
These sarcophagi were actually discovered in the port. So right away, that gives you a sense of how connected to the sea Cadiz is. Even going way back, they're so detailed. They have all these scenes from Phoenician mythology. It's like you can read them.
Oh, wow.
Get little glimpses into their beliefs and rituals.
I love that. It's like detective work. You're piecing together a story from all these little clues left behind. And the Museo de Cadiz doesn't just cover one period either, right?
No, not at all. One thing that's really well done in this museum is how it's organized. They use themes. Like, for example, there's a section called Death Through Archaeology.
Oh, it's interesting.
It's a journey through burial practices. It starts from prehistory and goes all the way to the early Christian era. You can really see how much changed over time.
And then there's the personal adornment theme. That covers a huge chunk of time, right? What kind of things fall under that?
Oh, all sorts of things. Jewelry, combs, clothing fasteners, the things that people would use to express themselves and to show their status. It really shows how important self-decoration has been throughout history. It crosses all cultures and time periods.
Yeah, it's a universal thing, isn't it? That need to express ourselves, to stand out. Okay, so we've talked about the puppets and the sarcophagi. Anything else we should know about the Museo de Cadiz before we move on?
Well, they have a really impressive collection of Roman artifacts. Those are from sites nearby, like Belo Claudia and Medina Sidonia. They give you a good picture of Roman life in that region.
So it really does cover the whole spectrum: ancient history, artistic traditions. Okay, maybe we should move on to a museum that's a bit more focused. What about the Museo de las Cortes de Cádiz?
Well, that's a great one. This museum focuses on the 18th and 19th centuries. There's a special emphasis on the Napoleonic siege and the 1812 Constitution, so it's a key period for understanding modern Spain.
Sounds fascinating. What should our listeners definitely make sure they see at this museum?
Definitely check out the model of Cadiz from 1777. It's super detailed. It's made out of mahogany and ivory. And you know what's really cool about it?
What?
The layout of the city has barely changed since then. Imagine that, walking those streets and recognizing landmarks that were there centuries ago.
Wow. That's really something. To have that three-dimensional view of the city frozen in time, it must really bring history to life. Okay, now, if our listener is exploring that historical part of the city, what else is nearby that we should mention?
Well, you can't go to Cadiz without seeing the Catedral de Cadiz. And guess what? Right next to the cathedral is the Museo de la Catedral.
Oh, perfect.
It's actually not in the cathedral itself, though. It's in a separate building called the Casa de la Contaduria.
So not inside the cathedral building itself.
Right. So what you can do is visit the cathedral and its tower first. And then there's this medieval arch. It takes you right to the museum. It's a great way to transition from that grandeur of the cathedral to the smaller space where they showcase its treasures.
Okay, that's a great tip for our listeners. And speaking of tips, did you know that the museum entry is included with the cathedral ticket?
Oh, that's good to know.
It's a fantastic deal. All right, let's change gears again. So far, we've done ancient history, the Napoleonic era. Now how about something a bit more lighthearted?
If we're talking lighthearted, then we got to talk about the Museo del Titere. That's the puppet museum. And it's right near another one we're going to talk about, the lithographic museum.
Oh, fun. So puppets and printing presses all in one area. Tell me more about this puppet museum. What's so special about it?
Well, this museum is all about puppetry from around the world. So picture this. You walk in through a patio. It used to be part of a fire station.
Cool.
And then you're surrounded by all these puppets from all these different cultures.
It must feel like a global village of puppetry. What are some of the highlights there?
There's an exhibit called Marionettes of the World. It has more than 500 pieces from every corner of the globe. And then they also have this massive international collection that was acquired in 2008. So you're getting this really global perspective on puppetry.
It's so cool how museums can transport you, to different times and different places. And sometimes it's in the most unexpected ways. Okay, so we've got puppets representing all these different cultures. That's a great transition to the lithographic museum, don't you think?
Definitely. I mean, lithography is a form of printing. And that's all about spreading images and ideas, right?
Exactly. And this museum is housed in an old printing press from 1861. I hear that's really rare in Spain. What should our listeners make sure they check out there?
Well, first of all, they have over 1,000 lithographic stones.
1,000?
Yeah. And they all come from Bavarian quarries. These stones are like works of art in themselves. Each one has its own grain, its own texture.
It's amazing to think about the artistry involved in the tools, before you even get to the final product. What else stands out?
Oh, they have this huge stone. It weighs like 300 kilograms.
Wow.
And they also have a manual printing press. It's from the 1850s, from Paris. Just imagine the craftsmanship that went into those pieces and the stories they could tell.
It must be so cool to see them up close and just imagine how those intricate prints were made. Okay, so we've done puppets, printing, ancient history. How about we fast forward a few centuries? Let's talk about the Central Cultural Municipal Reina Sofia.
Okay, that's a good one. It's a bit different. It's more like a cultural center. It's housed in this beautiful building. It's a former military building from 1756.
So a blend of old and new, kind of like Cadiz itself. What can our listener expect to find there?
Well, it houses all sorts of organizations, including the Museo Vassallo. That's dedicated to a 20th century sculptor named Juan Luis Vassallo.
Oh, I read about this. Vassallo wanted his work displayed in his hometown of Cadiz, and now you can find his sculptures throughout the entire center. What an amazing legacy.
It really is, and there's even more. The center also houses the Aramburu Picardo family collection. That includes all kinds of things: engravings, portraits, paintings.
So there's a lot to see there. Sculptures, paintings, engravings. It sounds like a feast for the eyes. And it gives you a glimpse into the artistic side of Cadiz, right?
Absolutely. It's a really good way to see how the city's culture has evolved over time and through different artistic lenses.
Now, before we move on to the next museum, tell me more about Vassallo. What was it about his hometown that made him want his work displayed there?
That's a great question. A lot of artists feel this really deep connection to the places they're from. And their work is tied up in their experiences and the landscapes that influence them. And for Vassallo, Cadiz wasn't just where he was born. It was his muse.
Yeah, I get that. The light, the sea, the history. It's all so inspiring. And to have his work displayed in this beautiful, historic building, it's like his art is in conversation with the city itself.
Exactly. And that conversation is still inspiring people today.
Well said. All right, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we should at least mention the Ecco.
Right, the Ecco. That's short for Espacio de Creacion Contemporanea. It's a really dynamic space. It's all about contemporary art and culture. And I mean, all forms.
So it sounds like the place to go for the most cutting-edge stuff in Cadiz.
It is. It's really about being public and showcasing all forms of artistic expression.
What kind of advice would you give our listener about navigating a space like that?
Definitely check their website, to see what's coming up. The Ecco is always changing, so you never know what you might find there. It's the best way to experience what's happening in the city's art scene right now.
So it's not so much about a set collection, right?
Right.
It's about experiencing that creative energy as it happens. Okay, I love that. All right, before we move on to part 2 of our deep dive, let's take a quick look at what we've covered already.
We started with the Museo de Cadiz. It's got everything from puppets to sarcophagi to Roman artifacts. Then we went to the Museo de las Cortes de Cadiz. That's a great place to learn about the Napoleonic era. And then, of course, the Museo de la Catedral, tucked away right near the cathedral itself. We even went to the Museo del Titere, the puppet museum. And then we explored the art of printing at the Lithographic Museum. And we got a little taste of 20th century sculpture at the Central Cultural Municipal Reina Sofia.
That's quite a lot already. And we're just getting started.
I know, right?
Join us for part 2, where we're going to delve into even more fascinating museums in this incredible city. Until then, keep exploring.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the museums of Cadiz. Wow, we've already uncovered so much. We've seen ancient sarcophagi, learned about a 20th century sculptor, and we're just scratching the surface, right?
Oh, definitely. We've covered the grand stuff, the whimsical stuff, the historical stuff. Now, how about we get off the beaten path a bit?
Ooh, I love that.
Cadiz is full of surprises. Our next museum is a great example of that.
Okay, you've got to tell me more. What this hidden gem we're going to discover.
Let's talk about the Yacimiento casa del lobispo. It's not as well known as some of the others, but it's a must-see for anyone who's into ancient history.
Okay, I'm intrigued. The name translates to Bishop's House site. What's the story there?
Well, it's right between the old and new cathedrals, so it's in a prime spot right in the heart of the city. But what's underground is even more interesting.
So it's not just a house then? Nope. It's the remains of a Phoenician funerary monument. It dates back to the 6th century BC. We're talking way before the Roman Empire.
Wow, that's going way back. I can picture it now, Like Indiana Jones brushing away the fan to reveal some ancient secret.
Exactly. It's a real journey back in time. The monument has these chambers, and they're carved right into the rock. It's considered one of the most important funerary complexes on the whole Iberian Peninsula.
Wow. So this is a big deal then, not just some random ruins. What can our listener actually see when they go to this site?
You can see how the Phoenicians buried their dead. You learn about their beliefs about the afterlife, and the craftsmanship is amazing. It really brings those rituals to life.
Speaking of bringing history to life, this site isn't just from the Phoenician period, right?
Good catch. The Yacimiento Casa del Obispo also has remains from the Roman Republican era. There's even a temple there. It was dedicated to Apollo, Aesculapius, and Hygeia.
So many layers of history, all in one place. It makes you wonder what else is hidden under the streets of Cadiz.
You know, it really does. Every corner you turn, there's some whisper of the past. Okay, speaking of ancient secrets, our next museum is like a time capsule. It takes us back to Roman times.
Ooh, a time capsule. I love it. Tell me more.
Get ready for the Fabrica de Salazones Romana. It's a Roman fish salting and processing factory, and it's from the 1st century BC, and it's really well preserved.
A fish factory. Doesn't sound too glamorous.
I know, right? But don't underestimate it. This place gives you a glimpse into the economy of Roman Cadiz. Remember, this city was famous for its fish back then, and this factory was a big part of that whole industry.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean. We always focus on the temples and palaces, but the everyday places can be just as interesting, can't they? Tell me about this factory.
Well, like I said, it's incredibly well preserved. You can still see the pools they use. They use them to process and salt the fish. That's how they made things like garum.
Garum. Wasn't that like a fermented fish sauce? I think it was a delicacy in ancient Rome.
You got it. It was a staple. And Cadiz was known for making some of the best garum in the whole Roman Empire. Can you imagine the smell of that factory?
I'm not sure smell is the right word, but it definitely paints a picture. So how does the museum show people what this ancient industry was like?
They have all these informative panels, and there's even a film. It explains the whole process of fish salting and how they make garum. You can practically see the workers rushing around, getting the fish ready, filling up the vats.
That's cool. You feel like you're right there. It's like you're witnessing Roman ingenuity firsthand. Okay, so we've gone from a Phoenician burial ground to a Roman fish factory. What else does Cadiz have for us?
Okay, how about this? We continue our journey through time, and we go to a site that was rediscovered in a really dramatic way. It's the Roman Theatre of Cadiz.
Oh, yeah, I read about that. They found it by accident, right, in 1980 during some demolition work.
I know, right? They were tearing down these old workshops, and boom, they found the remains of this huge Roman theater. It must have been so exciting for the workers and the archaeologists.
I bet. It's like the city was hiding a secret all that time, and then finally it was revealed. What can people see at the Roman Theatre Museum now?
The museum does a great job of showing the history of this theater. They have models and images and plans and all sorts of archaeological finds. It all comes together to tell the story of this place, this cultural hub.
So you can really get a feel for what it would have been like to go to a show there. Imagine the crowds, the actors, the spectacle.
Exactly. The museum takes you back to Roman Cadiz. You can almost experience the grandeur of this theater for yourself.
Amazing. Okay, so we've explored a site that was a total accident. We've seen a place that shows the not-so-glamorous side of Roman life. and we've seen a monument that tells us about ancient burial practices, Cadiz really is full of contrasts.
Well, definitely. And that's what makes it so interesting. You can be exploring ancient ruins one minute and then stumble upon a cutting-edge art scene the next. Speaking of which, let's switch gears again and talk about the Ecco.
The Ecco. That's the Espacio de Creacion Contemporanea, right? We mentioned it earlier. But I want to hear more. What makes this space so unique?
Well, it's not your typical museum, with the static displays and everything. The Ecco is all about what's happening now. It's contemporary. It's always changing. It's a place where artists can try new things and push the boundaries. Visual art, music, performance, you name it.
So it's about capturing that creative energy, the energy of right now.
Exactly. It's about experiencing the art and culture of Cadiz as it's happening. New exhibitions pop up all the time, concerts, events. There's always something new.
I love that. It's like a living, breathing thing, always changing, always evolving. So for someone who's planning a trip to Cadiz, what's the best way to navigate a space like that?
I'd say check their website often because the schedule's always changing, You don't want to miss out on something you'd be interested in.
That's great advice. Okay, before we move on, I want to go back to the Centro Cultural Municipal Reina Sofia. We talked about Juan Luis Vassallo, the sculptor, but this center is more than just his museum, right?
Right. It's really more of a cultural hub.
Right.
It's where all these different parts of Cadiz's artistic heritage come together. And the building itself is amazing. It's this old military building from 1756. So much history there.
I know. It's amazing how they've blended the old and the new together. We talked about the Museo Vassallo, but there are so many other organizations there too. It's like a little city of culture.
It really is. You've got the Real Academia Hispano-Americana, the Ateneo Gaditano, the Military Library, the Federico Joly Foundation, the Galvan Stamping Workshop. So many.
Wow, that's a lot. And it really shows Cadiz's ability to embrace both its past and its future. And speaking of the past, there's another collection at the Reina Sofia we should talk about, the Aramburu Picardo family collection.
Oh yeah, the one with the engravings and portraits and paintings, right?
That's the one. It's a really fascinating look into one family's artistic legacy. You get to see all these different styles and periods.
It's those personal touches that make history come alive, Seeing artifacts is one thing, but connecting them to real people, that's something else. I totally agree. Those personal stories add so much meaning to the bigger picture. It's like we're putting together a giant puzzle, and each piece, whether it's an ancient sarcophagus or a family portrait, helps us see the whole thing.
That's a great way to put it. As we talk about all these museums, I'm really struck by how many different ways there are to see Cadiz. You can explore ancient ruins, you can see Roman engineering, you can see the art of puppetry and printing, and you can even experience the contemporary art scene. It's like a kaleidoscope of experiences, and it's all connected by this one amazing city.
You said it. Cadiz is more than just a place. It's this tapestry that's made up of all these different threads: history, art, culture, and each museum gives you a different way to look at it.
That's beautifully put. And I have a feeling we have even more threads to unravel as we continue our deep dive. Ready for part 3? Welcome back to our final part of this Cadiz Museum deep dive. I'm already feeling a little sad that our virtual tour is almost over. We've seen some incredible things. We've explored ancient ruins and gotten a taste of Roman fish sauce. What a journey.
It really has been quite a journey. From that impressive Museo de Cadiz to that hidden gem, the Yacimiento casa del lobispo, we've really seen how diverse Cadiz's cultural heritage is.
Absolutely. But we're not done yet. We still have a couple of stops left on our exploration. Where should we head next?
Well, last time we were talking about experiencing the contemporary art scene in Cadiz, so how about we dive back into the Ecco, the Espacio de Creacion Contemporanea?
Perfect. That's the space that's all about showcasing the most cutting-edge art and culture, right? It's not about those static displays. It's about experiencing that creative energy as it's happening.
Exactly. It's a space that's constantly changing. It reflects how contemporary art is always evolving. One day you might find a really thought-provoking exhibition. The next day it could be a live music performance, or a film screening, or a workshop. The possibilities are endless.
I love that. Those kinds of places are always so exciting. You never know what you're going to find. It's all about pushing boundaries and experimenting and really engaging with art in a direct way.
You got it. And if you want to be in the know and experience the newest happenings in Cadiz's art scene, the Ecco is the place to go.
So for our listeners who are planning a trip to Cadiz, what's the best way to approach a space like that?
Well, my advice would be to check their website often. because the schedule changes all the time. You don't want to miss something that you'd be really interested in.
Good point. Okay, before we move on, I want to go back to the Centro Cultural Municipal Reina Sofia for a minute. We talked about Juan Luis Vassallo, the 20th century sculptor who wanted his work displayed in his hometown. But that center is so much more than just a museum for his work, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. It's really more like a cultural hub. It's where all these different pieces of Cadiz's artistic heritage come together. And the building itself is amazing. It's this former military building from 1756. It's just steeped in history.
It's so cool how they've combined the old and the new so seamlessly. We mentioned the Museo Vassallo, but there are so many other organizations housed in that center. It's like a little mini city of culture.
It really is. You've got the Real Academia Hispano-Americana, the Ateneo Gaditano, the Military Library, the Federico Joly Foundation, the Galvan Stamping Workshop. It's incredible.
Wow, that's quite a list. And it really speaks to how Cadiz embraces both its past and its future. And speaking of the past, we should talk about one more collection at the Reina Sofia, the Aramburu Picardo family collection.
Oh, yes. That collection gives you such a fascinating look into this family's artistic legacy. You'll find engravings, portraits, paintings, all sorts of things that give you a glimpse into different styles and periods.
It's those little personal touches that really make history come alive, you know? It's one thing to see these objects in a museum, but it's another thing to connect them to real people who lived and worked in that city.
I totally agree. Those personal stories add a whole other dimension to the historical narrative. It's like we're building a giant puzzle, and each piece, whether it's an ancient sarcophagus or a family portrait, it all helps us see the bigger picture.
That's a great way to put it. Well, as we wrap up our Cadiz Museum deep dive, I'm really amazed by how each museum offers its own unique perspective on the city and its history. I mean, we've explored ancient ruins, we've seen examples of Roman industry, we've seen puppetry and printing, and we've even gotten a taste of the contemporary art scene.
And that's just scratching the surface. There's still so much more to discover in Cadiz. Every visitor will find something that resonates with them, I'm sure of it.
Well said. I hope our deep dive has inspired our listeners to explore Cadiz and all its wonders for themselves. And speaking of exploring, we have some extra goodies in our show notes.
Definitely check those out. We'll include links to Clive Muir. He's the author of our source material. He also has some other projects that focus on sustainable and eco-friendly travel in Andalusia. He's a great resource if you're planning a trip.
Absolutely. And as always, we'd love to hear from you. Which museum sparked your interest the most? Let us know in the comments and we can keep the conversation going. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.